Good evening, everyone. My name is Jenna Burke. I'm a premium tutor and executive function coach with Appleroot Education, and I'm here today to talk about LD, ADHD 2E, how to support students who learn differently. I'm so excited to get to discuss this information with you, and hopefully we'll have a really lively Q&A at the end. So please feel free to drop any questions that you might have into the Q&A box, and I will look forward to answering your questions at the end. So first off, our why Appleroot exists. Our core belief is that when you change students' self-beliefs, you change their lives, you change they're capable of what they change what they are capable of doing. So that is what motivates us as a company. We build skills for schools and beyond, whether that's academic tutoring, support for subjects in school, test prep, so high stakes testing like the SAT or ACT, as well as executive function coaching, which is what I'm going to be really focusing on this evening. So my objectives for this presentation this evening are to identify some common learning differences, discuss common accommodations for students with LDs, most likely in their school environment, and also introduce strategies that you can use in your own home. But first, some definitions, because this is a bit of an alphabet soup of an area, so I want to make sure that we all know what we're talking about. So attention deficit / hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, affects close to 9% of children. You usually see differential brain development and delays in brain maturation, and it usually includes challenges with executive functioning, regulating attention, and inhibition. And there are a couple different subtypes of ADHD. There's ADD inattentive, which is characterized by difficulty holding attention on tasks easily. So this might be someone who seems like they're daydreaming all the time or doesn't seem to listen to you, has difficulty organizing their tasks, and they have to exert a lot of energy just to stop themselves from kind of floating off into their own thoughts. ADHD hyperactive is characterized by a lack of physical inhibition, especially. So anyone who seems sort of like they're on the go or driven by a motor, often interrupting or intruding on others, whether that's physically, verbally, that kind of behavior. And then we've got ADHD combined, which has symptoms of both inattention as well as hyperactivity. And specifically, how the ADHD brain differs. I think this is pretty important because it's really easy for people to say like, oh, it's just kids these days with their devices and, you know, everyone just needs to have more recess. That's really what ADHD is. Well, I agree, everyone should have more recess, but there are also some neurological differences in a brain with ADHD that I do want to talk about. So in the frontal cortex, the dark blue part of the brain, that controls attention, executive function, which I'll talk about a bit more, and organization. The limbic system regulates emotions and attention. The basal ganglia, which is that light blue area, can cause intrabrain communication to short circuit if it isn't wired appropriately, which then looks like inattention. And my favorite one to say, the reticular activating system, is a major relay system in the brain, and that can also cause inattention, impulsivity, and possibly hyperactivity as well. So the main culprits of ADHD, we've got norepinephrine, which is made from dopamine, and that's a chemical messenger that transmits nerve signals. So that can increase alertness, arousal, attention, and it ends up affecting the sleep-wake cycle, your mood, and your memory. So if you are a person with ADHD or you know somebody who has it, you might realize that they have a really difficult time going to sleep or staying asleep, and they may also have a lot of trouble with their working memory, keeping things in their short-term memory. Sometimes it feels like the information just goes in one ear and out the other. That can be from a lack of norepinephrine or just norepinephrine that's not working the way that it needs to. And dopamine also regulates the pleasure center of the brain. You might have heard someone say like, "Oh, I really need a dopamine hit, so I'm going to, play some video games or something to sort of get that pleasure back." Well, it's really hard to pay attention to something boring if your brain is desperate for dopamine. So if you're sitting in a class that would normally take a lot of your energy to focus anyway, and you really need dopamine, and you see something out the window and it's this cute little bird that's hopping from branch to branch, it can be really hard to persuade your brain that that's not actually what you need to be focusing on in the moment. And on the other hand, there is hyperfocus. So you finally get to pay attention to something that brings you pleasure. So this could come in the form of finding something on Wikipedia that you think is really interesting. And then all of a sudden, 2 hours later, you've just been rabbit holing down Wikipedia, learning everything there is to learn about Welsh mining in the 1820s. So that hyperfocus can certainly come in handy when it's something you're really interested in and you also have to write a research paper about it. That's great. But sometimes that can also do things like deprive you of sleep if it's really hard to turn your brain off and just go to bed at night. And this differentiation of hyperfocus, but also a loss of attention, is why I really prefer to talk about ADHD as attention dysregulation, not attention deficit. It's not that there isn't attention, it's that the attention isn't being regulated in a way that is really helpful to that person in the moment, especially in an educational environment. And there are a lot of neurodiversity diagnoses that frequently co-occur. Anywhere from 31 to 45% of children with ADHD also have an additional learning disability, and 25 to 40% of children with dyslexia also have ADHD, and 25% of children with ADHD also have dyslexia. They're all related. ADHD is often found in individuals with autism, and autism presents in a good percentage of people with ADHD as well. So they're all linked. They are commonly found together. So hopefully some of the other LDs that I talk about this evening may be of interest to someone because they might have one or both or a whole bunch of them. So I've talked about executive function skills a little bit, but let's really delve into them, because executive function deficits can show up in a lot of these neurodiverse diagnoses. So there's planning. So the idea of like, oh, I want to go on this trip, so I need to plan for it. That's an executive function skill. Prioritization. That could be, oh, my trip is abroad, so I want to make sure that I've got my passport. That's really important. I need to start on that right away, as opposed to thinking, what's really important is I want to have a really cute outfit, so I'm going to go shopping for that. I'll deal with my passport later. And then realizing, oh no, it expired. Now I can't go on my trip. Organization. So knowing where the passport is, not realizing on the day that, oh, I know it's in this pile of papers somewhere. Oh no, it's not in that pile of papers. Now I can't find it. Goal setting and follow through. So that might be, okay, I really want to go to Greece with my family, so I'm going to set a goal of, we're going to book the hotel on this date, and we're going to book the flights on this date, and like following through on those goals. Time management, a big one that definitely shows up. A lot of my students really struggle with time management, whether that's because they have time blindness, so it's hard for them to see that loads of time has passed and they haven't really gotten that much done, or whether they just feel overwhelmed from everything at school and they don't know how to use the time that they've got effectively. Self-regulation and self-monitoring sort of go hand in hand. So self-regulating would be being able to tell yourself, like, I know that I'm upset that math test didn't really go well, but I'm just going to sit down and do my math homework and I'll do better on the next one, as opposed to getting really upset and really worked up about how horrible that math test went. And now I can't do the math homework tonight because I'm so upset. And then you start pushing off the math homework every single night. So not being able to self-regulate those emotions can be really difficult. Self-monitoring, that might be realizing like, oh, I didn't do a good job studying on that last test. I thought I did, but now that I'm thinking about it, I had the book open, but I was also like chatting with my friend and I didn't really do all the homework. Being able to look at yourself and accurately understand what you did or did not do is a really important skill. And inhibition. So this is a really hard one if you have a phone in your life. Being able to put the phone down and say like, okay, I'm going to stop playing that game on my phone because I need to get my homework done. Inhibition is a really, really good skill to have in your back pocket. And the three pillars of executive function that kind of lend themselves to all of these various skills are working memory, so the ability to remember something, especially short term. Cognitive flexibility. Flexibility is really, really important, and it can be really, really hard. If life throws you a curveball, being able to get around that and have that follow through. And self-control, which really comes into self-regulation, self-monitoring, inhibition, and that goal setting and follow through as well. So now a couple other learning differences. So there's dyslexia. So this is actually a really interesting typeface that was created by a designer with dyslexia. It is not meant to mimic how letters look if you are dyslexic. He wanted to help people who do not have dyslexia to understand and have empathy for what it is like to be dyslexic and go through the world finding it very frustrating trying to read. So he basically took a typeface and deleted about 40% of each letter, and then created it as sort of a project that became an art exhibit so that you could see, if these letters started forming words, this was genuinely going to be really difficult, and it's going to take you about 10 times as long to interpret what the letters are doing. So I think it's a really interesting thought experiment, and I love sharing this with people. So the specific definition of dyslexia, this is from the International Dyslexia Association, and I'm just going to read it out to you because I think that, it's nothing's better than a definition that the association provides. So dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. So it does not have to do with like an eye problem. This is all to do with development in the brain. So it's characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So you'll hear this a lot in learning differences like dyslexia. So decoding refers to knowing what a word is. So looking at the word and understanding what that refers to. Encoding is when you are creating that word. So what we would usually talk about is spelling. So if you have dyslexia, you usually struggle with spelling, and you also struggle with understanding what a word is that somebody else has written for you. So these difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities. So just because you have dyslexia does not mean that you are unintelligent, that you are not gifted, that you are not going to be an excellent student. It is just one part of how your brain works. So some consequences may include problems in reading comprehension, absolutely, because if it's difficult for you to read, reading comprehension is going to be hard, and reduced reading experience, because if it's taking you a lot longer to decode a word, it's going to slow down the amount that you can read, which then, of course, impedes your growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Now, twice exceptional is, or 2E, which is how we referred to it in the title of this presentation, is a label that I think is getting a little bit more attention. But if you haven't seen it before, Twice exceptional, or 2E, is used to refer to gifted children who have the characteristics of gifted students with the potential for high achievement and also have a disability as defined by federal or state eligibility criteria. So this could include a specific learning disability, speech and language disorders, an emotional behavioral disorder, physical disability, being on the autism spectrum, or an impairment like ADHD. And this can be challenging both to diagnose and to deal with as a person, because there are, it can sometimes seem like they're two opposing forces, and it can be difficult for people to spot. So the teacher might see a student who's got a ton of interest in math and science in this particular example. They've got excellent understanding and problem-solving skills, but as soon as you give them a task involving reading or writing, they struggle, they lose interest, they get incredibly frustrated. Anything to do with homework or note-taking or assigned reading, incredibly difficult to complete. So the teacher is baffled because this is a student with such an incredible aptitude for math and science, and they're so intelligent, but their reading and writing skills are really lacking. What you might see as a parent is a student where homework is a struggle every single night. It feels like the assignments that their friends are completing really quickly takes this student hours. The student is disorganized and her backpack is a mess, but she's got deep interest in subjects outside of school. If it's a topic that she actually cares about, she can engage in that for hours. She's got all of these random facts about trains that you've never heard of before. But when it comes to school, she might say she hates it. She becomes withdrawn. She really doesn't want to go, even though you know that she's an incredibly bright person and could be thriving in an academic environment. So it's all of these contradictions that can make being twice exceptional a bit of a puzzle for educators. And of course, there are so many other learning differences that I won't be able to cover this evening, although I will try. Because everything isn't just ADD, right? That's the one that I think gets a lot of media coverage, but there are so many other learning differences that it's important to recognize and look out for. So there could be memory or retrieval issues. So that could be, you know, I've been talking about short-term memory, but this could involve long-term memory as well. Auditory processing issues. So somebody who has a real difficulty getting verbal instructions, they need everything to be written down for them, or it could be difficult for them to process sound if there's any other kind of background noise, or a visual processing issue, you know, potentially related to dyslexia or not, where it's just really difficult to process anything that is written down in front of them. Dyscalculia is, I think, casually known as like, you know, I don't know, like dyslexia for numbers, but it's a little more complicated than that. It could be anything from having difficulty recognizing numbers, delaying in learning how to count, struggling to connect the numerical symbol for 5 with the word 5, having difficulty recognizing patterns, losing track when counting, needing to use your fingers when you're counting. I've got this really interesting exercise up on the screen. So if you want to take a second to count these dots that I've got here. So children with dyscalculia take longer to count dot patterns because it's the difficulty recognizing patterns is part of dyscalculia. So a lot of people might look at this and go, oh, okay, I see a group of 4, and then 1. So that's 9. But if you're dyscalculic, you might count the dots one by one, which is definitely going to take you longer. And you might even lose track because all of those dots look exactly the same. And that can get very, very frustrating very, very quickly. Dysgraphia is a neurological disorder that is characterized by writing disabilities. So the person's writing could be distorted or incorrect. And dyspraxia is more of a coordinated movement kind of developmental disorder. It usually continues into adulthood, but symptoms could include something like a delay in walking or sitting. It can sometimes be difficult to jump or perform, tying your shoelaces, things like that. So now let's talk about accommodations for these kinds of students, because getting accommodations in school is really, really important. No matter what grade you're in, it is never too late to get the kinds of accommodations that are going to support you. It can solve so many issues for students with LDs, just making sure that you've got the right support. Even if it's just extra time, that can be essential for students with LDs, because then you can show what you know, but only when you have enough time. And I want to emphasize that accommodations are not just for school. The Americans with Disabilities Act includes learning disabilities as conditions where an employee may be entitled to reasonable accommodation or modification in order to ensure their ability to effectively do their job. So this is not just, being coddled when you're in middle and high school, and then when you go out into the real world, you're on your own. No, these accommodations for genuine disabilities can be brought into the workplace. So making sure that you're getting the accommodations that you deserve is a really important step. So in order to qualify for a formal accommodation plan, the student may need to be evaluated. So there's all different kinds of evaluations. Here are three of the most common. So there's a psychological evaluation. This is intended to guide diagnosis and treatment from a medical perspective, not educational. A psychoeducational evaluation, now we're starting to get into the educational, will identify the student's difficulties in the classroom, their learning style generally, and what is happening. So it may not provide enough data to diagnose and recommend treatment for disabilities, but it's certainly, moving in the right direction. And then you've got a neuropsychological evaluation. So this is a formal assessment of cognitive functioning controlled by different regions of the brain. So this is focused more on why the difficulties are happening, not just what is happening. And that can be used to diagnose a disability. And then you get the formal plans. So once you've been tested, you can, depending on the school system or what exactly you need, you may be eligible for one of these plans. So an IEP, an individualized education plan, a 504, or an RTI, which is a response to intervention, which is an educational strategy used in schools. So those are all designations that you may see or be familiar with. If you're in a private school, you may get a school-based official accommodation plan, because private schools are not governed by the same rules as public schools. They may have different terminology, but evidence that you receive school-based accommodations is so important once you get into high stakes testing. If you are interested in taking the SAT or the ACT, or if you are looking to get into a private high school and your student is currently a middle schooler, you may want to get accommodations so that they're able to have accommodations on the SSAT or the ISEE or the HSPT. It's definitely an alphabet soup this evening, but getting those school-based accommodations can help prove your case that you get these accommodations at school. So now I would like them for this test. So some specific accommodations for each of these learning disabilities that I've been talking about. So with ADD, extended time on tests, immediately helpful. Especially, if you are ADD inattentive, you need some time to remind yourself, oh, right, I don't want to look at the bird out the window. Extended time is going to be really helpful. You can also get instruction and assignments tailored to the student. If you know that you just do not listen well, you can make sure that all of your instructions are written down. getting positive reinforcement and feedback, assistive technology, which I will get back to, love assistive technology, allowing extra breaks or time to move around, which is so important. If physically, if your body is just dying for physical stimulus, the worst thing in the world can be, okay, I need you to sit still for an hour and a half. So even just getting extra breaks can be hugely helpful, allow you to go outside, do a couple jumping jacks, come back in and be ready to focus. Or an environment with limited distractions, realizing like I need to be in the front row. So the teacher is right in front of me and my friends are all behind me. I just cannot be in the middle of the group. Or extra assistance with staying organized can also be very helpful. Dyslexia accommodations. Extended time is essentially a given for a student with a diagnosis of dyslexia. It is the accommodation because if you remember that sort of that art project that I showed you earlier, it is going to take time to sort your way through all of those various letters. So students with dyslexia may receive double or even triple time, depending on the severity of the disability. And even if students don't always use a reader or text-to-speech technology, both of which are really great accommodations for students with dyslexia, it is key to figure out what these students need, especially for timed testing. So these are some other ways that you can have accommodations. If in terms of the presentation of information, you could get verbal instructions instead of written, or repetition of those instructions, larger print, which can sometimes be easier to read, or visual prompts or cues instead of something that's written down using words. In terms of response, marking your answers in the textbook instead of on a separate answer sheet. I will say that one nice thing about the SAT going digital is now there will not be a Scantron. So you can just select your answer on the screen and you don't need to worry about transferring your answer to the Scantron. So that's a really nice way that the SAT is now becoming more accessible. You can also have assistive technology like an audio recorder. So that, I definitely had friends in college who were allowed to record lectures because that was just an easier way for them to get that information. For setting, you can also ask for a smaller group, an individual room, especially with testing. It can be really helpful if you're just in a room by yourself. With the proctor, there's nobody else to distract you. You can just sort of, take care of business without having to worry about anybody else tapping their pencil and all of a sudden your brain's off somewhere else. Like I talked about before, sitting in front of the teacher or another alternative furniture arrangement can also be really helpful. And then timing. So extended time, I already talked about, more frequent breaks, or changing the order of your tasks or subtests, depending on what you need. So those are all of the official accommodations that you can get in school, but let's talk about what you can do at home. So a big one is to model coping strategies. A lot of times students with learning disabilities feel like they are failing in class, whether it's because they see everybody else is going so much faster than them, or everybody else thinks this book is really funny and I haven't even finished the first sentence and I don't understand what's going on. So you want to make sure that your student knows that a mistake is not the end of the world. So, whether you're purposefully making mistakes or you're just acknowledging them, you're not trying to hide them. You're saying, okay, I made a mistake. This is how I'm going to recover it. This is how I'm going to move on and learn from that experience. So many of my students, whether neurotypical or neurodiverse, are afraid to make a mistake in front of me, and that always makes me so sad. Mistakes are how we learn. Mistakes are so important. They're the best. I love it when someone makes a mistake because that's how you learn. All right. And it's also important to focus on your strengths. Right? You want to figure out, what do I do best naturally? Are you a better listener than a reader? Then audiobooks are going to be your friend. Get the tools that help you be your best. If you are the sort of person who needs to play music to block out noise while doing your homework, go for it. Personally, I really like websites like Coffeetivity, which create the like sort of the background sound as if you're in a coffee shop. And I love that because it sounds like everybody else is really busy and working. And so I too shall be really busy and working. And for somebody else who's walking by, it might seem like I am in a really distracting environment, but it works for what I need. If you need to throw a ball against the wall to help you study or focus, some kind of physical movement, find a way to enable that without bothering other people. Maybe don't throw the ball against the wall that happens to be connected to your sibling's room. Maybe pick a different wall. Don't fight yourself, right? Work with your innate design because you're already that way, so you might as well focus on your strengths. So this is one of my favorite things to do with my students is to partialize tasks. Take something big, something that looks really scary, and break it up into small steps. So here, learning how to tie your shoelaces, make it something that can be broken down into smaller steps and understand the steps, and it will become a lot less intimidating. So if you're working with a student and they get stuck, instead of just telling them what you think they should do, use dialogue, use good questions. So can you describe what it feels like? Have you ever felt this same feeling on other tests or in other situations? What has worked in the past to get you unstuck? I love those two questions because you're appealing to what have you done in the past that worked? Right? There are so many things that maybe they're not exactly a carbon copy of what happened, but you can think about what did I do in the past when I had this kind of problem? Did that work? What do I wish I had done differently? How can I apply that to now? Or what about this particular passage or question gave you trouble? Love asking that kind of question when I'm tutoring a student, right? The more that you can reflect back and go, I really didn't like this passage because it was a fiction passage and they were messing around with time. I didn't realize that they'd done a flashback. Okay, great. Let's look for more passages that mess around with time so that we can look for hints of, oh yes, here's where the flashback is going to happen because they just said, I remember when. Ah, good. I need to notice that. Or how do you think you can move past this if and when it happens on test day? It is great to practice for worst case scenarios so that when they happen, you're not filled with panic. You can say, okay, I hate this kind of reading passage, and here it is. It's the very first one, but that's okay. I have already decided that if this kind of passage shows up, I'm going to skip it and I'm going to come back. So I don't have to worry about, oh no, I'm such a failure for not doing this passage first. That was my plan. I'm not worried. This is exactly what I wanted to do. So you want to prime your student to begin to approach problem solving strategically. So getting that prefrontal cortex involved, moving from frustration to analysis. So that's the, have you ever felt the same feeling? What has worked in the past? What about this passage gave you trouble? And then action. How can you move past this? So assistive technologies, they're so great. They're so wonderful, whether that's getting printed notes, which is something that you can get as an accommodation, especially in college, or an audio recording of a lecture or a video recording now when Zoom is ubiquitous, an e-reader that reads a text out loud to you, so many different productivity apps, and I would be happy to make some recommendations if anyone's interested at the end. But there are so many assistive technologies that are out there that are ready and waiting to help make your life easier. So this is a wonderful app wheel from the Curry College. I've got a link right here if you're interested in it. The Curry College does a lot of really great work with students with learning disabilities, and I can't recommend them enough. But this particular app wheel organizes all of these assistive technologies by studying, writing, organization, and reading, and then divides them out into different categories. So for instance, for studying, you might be interested in generating information versus memory. I need to be able to remember how this works, or mind mapping whether that's brainstorming or like, how do I start planning this essay that I need to write, or self-regulation, making sure like I'm not gonna get off track, anything like that. So they get really, really specific, which is kind of great. You can go, okay, for writing, I need to record my lecture. Oh, great. Here's like 6 different apps that will help me do that. So specifically for studying, there's the gathering information, working on your memory, mind mapping. For writing, you might need help with note-taking, recording lectures, speech to text, word processing. Organization, so many reminders and to-do list apps, so many. Calendars, I live on my digital calendar. I got to carry it with me everywhere I go. If it's not on my digital calendar, it is not going to work. Of course, digital storage, which is really great because then it helps cut down on the amount of physical clutter that you have. If it's in your Google Drive, in the cloud, in Dropbox, then you can have a more organized space around you. Or reading digital textbooks, fantastic. PDF readers, scanning. There's so many assistive technologies that can be really, really helpful, and there's no need for you to struggle because they're there. And I alluded to this a little bit in the beginning when we were talking about self-regulation, but there are a lot of social emotional challenges when it comes to having executive function sort of dysregulation that you need help with. And difficulty with executive functioning can present itself in ADHD, in autism, in a whole lot of different learning differences. So I did want to address that a little bit. So there's a couple things that you can do if you're realizing that you're having difficulties with self-regulating. So one of them is just identifying the emotion, getting to know your feelings. I am a meditation nerd. I love it. I meditate every single day. Couldn't recommend it more. And what's really great about meditating is that you really get to understand what your feelings are. I think that it can be really intimidating to people with ADHD to think about like just sort of sitting and thinking of nothing. That seems impossible. But really, it isn't about thinking of nothing. It's just watching your thoughts happen and then going, oh, how interesting, and letting them go. And that can be really helpful if you can see a feeling. If you go, oh, I'm feeling angry, interesting. Okay, I'm going to let that go. You can also do visualizations to gain distance from your thoughts. It can be helpful to visualize that you're sitting on a beach and you can see your emotions coming in on the waves, like it's high tide, and they come in and they feel really powerful. And then the tide recedes and they go out. So being able to see that your feelings are not you, your thoughts are not you, can be really, really helpful. It can also be important to listen to your body, doing a body scan, just sort of sitting back and going from the top of your head to the tips of your toes and just sort of checking in and going, I've got a little tension right here. My shoulders are so tight, like just sort of checking in with your body and seeing how you feel. A good checklist is, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Have I been outside? And if the answers are yes, yes, or no, I would recommend doing something about that. A lot of the time when it feels like everything is hopeless, you really just need a snack. When you feel like you can't go on, you need some water. And if you feel like everyone hates you, you probably need to go stand next to a tree. So it's always a good idea to sort of have that checklist nearby if you find that these are areas where you just need a quick reminder. It's also really important to build emotional resilience. And so this is not to be confused with toxic positivity, right? Like if you audition for the school play and you don't get in, that stinks. And I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't. Like that is a really awful feeling. You put yourself out there, you feel embarrassed, you feel sad because all your friends get to be in the play and you don't. So the first key action in building emotional resilience is recognizing that feeling of going, I feel really sad and I feel really embarrassed and I feel really angry that the teacher didn't cast me because I know I did a great job and how dare they. So recognize that feeling. It's there, can't deny it. And then identify the positives. Okay, positives could be, I auditioned. It was really scary, but I did it. I could have just said, I don't want to, but I did try. I put myself out there and I practiced my monologue. I didn't just go up there and wing it. I did a couple practices with my parents in the living room, and I did try. And then create an action plan. Okay, I'm going to go to the teacher and ask for feedback and ask what else could I have done to have been a better auditioner. I'm going to start reading some more monologue books so I can find a really good monologue for the spring play. I'm going to practice with my friends. Maybe my parents are fine, but I want to get the opinion of somebody else who's doing the school plays so that they can give me some feedback and figure out what I can do to be a stronger actor, right? That's emotional resilience, saying, okay, this thing happened to me and it feels awful. What am I going to do about it? And managing negative emotions, because negative emotions happen and it is okay. Give yourself permission to grieve that you did not get into the school play. It stinks. And then congratulate yourself that you are working on building your uncertainty tolerance. The more that you do things where you don't know what's going to happen, whether that's auditioning for the school play or trying out for a sports team or joining a club where you don't know anyone else there, looking at uncertainty and building your ability to be in an uncertain environment is such an important skill to learn. So, some specific advice about helping students with all of these different LDs that I've been talking about. So, specifically helping students with ADHD, looking for the strength in the diagnosis. ADD, ADHD has evolved, right? So there have to be some benefits. If you find yourself hyper-focusing on something, that can be really helpful if you really need to get work done and you're able to just sit there and be like, all right, here's my deadline, I'm doing it. That can be a superpower, right? Everything in life has pluses and minuses. ADD is not a disaster. You just need to know how your brain works and how you can work around it. Don't fight the fidget. It is okay if someone is swinging their legs all the time, or if they're, playing with their hair or doodling. It is fine. I once talked with a mom who let me know that her son was probably going to be doodling orbits when he worked with me because he had extreme ADHD. It was really difficult for him to sit still, and it was really helpful for him to draw orbits on his paper, just to give himself something to do, and because he really wants to grow life on Mars. That's his thing. And I said, well, that's absolutely fine. That's great. Thank you for letting me know. I won't be offended at all if he starts doing something like that because he needs to. And the mom was visibly moved because I think she'd had a lot of teachers in her life who felt that if he just paid attention more, it would be fine. And at no point did I ever take that personally, right? He needed to move. We would take a break in the middle of the session and he would show me the family photos, right? Allow students to get up and move while they're answering questions, while they're studying. Sure, go get a drink. It is fine to move around. If you are spending all of your energy trying to stop moving, it's harder to think. So let the body move, free up your resources. Sometimes if you're engaging with the text, if you're actively reading it, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that can be really helpful. That can sort of satisfy that need to move. Moving from topic to topic, also really, really helpful. So if you're getting bored with grammar, start working on math. If you're bored with math, start working on science. I love the Pomodoro technique, so named because the person who invented it used their kitchen timer, which looked like a tomato. And the idea is that you're working for 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break. Work for 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. If you've got ADHD, you might want to try 15 minutes of work, 15 or 20 minutes of break time. So giving yourself a little bit more time to bounce back. There are wonderful focus apps that use this Pomodoro technique where they will automatically give you those times. So it'll just ding and say like, okay, you know, you need to go take a break now. And that can be really wonderful because it's really hard to focus for long periods of time. So rather than burn out, make sure that you give yourself a break. You look at something that isn't your computer screen. If you think back to the slide I had about tying your shoes, this is the same exact idea. So this bite-sized learning is so helpful. So I'm just going to read one passage at a time. I'm just going to do one page of math. Taking this large project and I am going to cut it up into little bits and pieces. So if you remember that initiation that I talked about, the ability to start something, that can be really hard if you have a lack of EF skills. So if you can make it so it's like, okay, I'm going to write the outline and then I'm going to take all my I'm going to find my quotes and then I'm going to put the quotes in the outline and then I'm going to draft my thesis statement, and then I'm going to draft my conclusion, like little pieces. And if you just do one of those a day or one of those an hour, it suddenly becomes so much more manageable than write a 10-page paper. And you want to set your short time limits and your small goals, right? 2 minutes working is better than no minutes working. I just read something in the New York Times the other day that said that, you know, jogging for a short amount of time at a really slow pace is actually beneficial. You do not need to say to yourself, well, I'm never going to run super fast, so I might as well not run. No, run super slow and super short. It is better than nothing. And I know I've been talking a little bit about breaks a lot, but short breaks every 30 minutes or so important. And make sure that you're moving. You're walking, you're stretching, you're going outside. If you are studying with your student, take a cognitive break with them. You know, talk about hobbies or, hey, what's going on with homecoming or, you know, just something, just let everyone's brain take a bit of a break. A distraction is fine. If your student is worried that they're going to forget something while they're studying, what I've found is really helpful is to have like a whiteboard or a pad of paper. So if they realize like, oh, I wanted to ask mom about when we're going to my grandparents, you know, just write that down so that you don't feel like, okay, I'm going to stop studying to go ask mom, and then I'm going to come back and have no idea what I was doing. So once you get that thought out of your head, not taking up primary focus, you're fine. If you have EF deficits, so all of these lovely executive function skills that I was talking about earlier, try to limit yourself to 3 things to do, like the 3 solid things you want to do, set those goals, build your to-do list, 20-minute increments, and take those mental breaks. I recommend having a homework book, either analog or digital, where all your information is recorded in one place. I have my trusty bullet journal. I love it. Feel free to Google that, or I'm also happy to talk about that in the Q&A. But just having something where you can always look at it and go, okay, this is what's going on. Attitude is everything. You want to make sure that you're giving constant positive regard. Every time a student makes progress, it is crucial to highlight it. If a student has executive function issues, they are often so hard on themselves. But the more that they see themselves succeeding, the more confident they are to try something new, try something challenging, and that it's okay to fail. And remember, self-efficacy is the goal. I once had a parent tell me that she was her daughter's executive function, and that did not go well. You know, like, you cannot send your kid off to college having never asked them to take responsibility for getting their homework turned in. There needs to be a time where you sort of let go of the reins and let the student start taking charge. Google Calendar, I love it. I plan out everything. And you can plan out your long-term assignments, break them into manageable pieces. You can track your short and long-term projects and assignments and schedule in downtime, which is super important. Everyone forgets to give yourself that break, but you definitely want it to be in there. So for dyslexia, technology is your friend, right? Digital books can come with built-in accommodations like font changes if you need to change everything to Comic Sans because it's easier to read. There's the Kurzweil text-to-speech assistive technology that can help you get through material faster. If you've got a neuropsychological report, I would recommend checking out the recommendations section. That written documentation can always be useful, especially when you're figuring out what kind of accommodations you want to make sure your school gives you. And dyslexia can also impact math as much as anything else, because, if you've got a lot of word problems, all of a sudden your math section has reading in it. So don't forget that your student may need support here as well. Just because they don't have dyscalculia doesn't mean that math isn't going to be a challenge. And one size does not fit all. Some students need to slow down. Other students like using mnemonics or funny visual images or songs to help encode information. Some students do really well if you actively read, which I'll show you what that looks like. It really, you're going to need to sort of fiddle around and see what's going to work. So this is what active reading looks like. You're underlining important information, circling transition words or names, starring the main idea, summarizing the paragraph with a few keywords. I love doing that. And that can help the brain create a map of where information is located in the passage, which can be really helpful for people with reading difficulties. So deeply engaging with that text, making it active, not passive, super, super helpful. Cross out the unnecessary information, rewrite important information, bracket the first and last sentence of the paragraph as a reminder of what your main idea could be. So the more physical engagement with the text, the better. If you are dyslexic or if you have someone dyslexic in your life, I strongly recommend reading this book, The Dyslexic Advantage. It is so cool. It talks about the hidden benefits of having dyslexia, examples of people with dyslexia who make a difference in their fields by using their gifts. Strong recommend. They just updated it. It's a fascinating read. If you are someone with memory or retrieval issues, limit the amount of information that you're trying to learn during any study session. Shorter sessions are better. If you're learning a new concept, review prior knowledge so that you've got something to hook into, to build upon. Space out your study sessions so that you can give that student time to do forced recall, to rehearse and reinforce that information, and make sure that you're dual encoding. So doing something visually and something auditorily so that you've got two different ways of remembering it. You want to rehearse that information just after learning, definitely within 24 hours. So if I learned about the Visigoths today, I'm going to want to recheck in with that information tomorrow. Have the students write down key concepts in a meaningful and structured way, and then forced retrieval in different environments. So if you're studying in your bedroom, make sure somebody quizzes you in the kitchen, because you don't want to find out that it was so, everything's encoded in the bedroom and then I go to school and it all goes away. So make sure that you are trying to remember that information in different environments. If you're working with somebody with auditory processing issues, you want to make sure you are facing the student when you're speaking, that you're in close proximity, you're limiting the distracting sounds in the environment, you're articulating clearly at a good pace, you're not over egging the pudding in terms of directions, and you're making sure the student knows that they can always ask a clarifying question. It is always okay to say, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" So if you have somebody with math challenges, you want to slow the problem-solving process down, break things into discrete steps. You want to discriminate between the relevant information and the distracting information. It doesn't matter that Susie has a lemonade stand. It does matter how much she's charging per glass. You want to articulate the steps involved in solving a given problem. Get yourself a plan of attack, and making sure, again, that you are reviewing those previously taught concepts. So, in summary, every brain is different. There is no cookie cutter approach. You want to make sure that you are super positive, reinforcing, affirming. We want to build self-efficacy, right? So any individual grade is not as important as that shift in self-concept and self-belief that you can do these hard things. You want to be flexible, responsive, and creative when working with students with LDs. I know that I'm always at my best when I am working with a student with learning disabilities, because it forces me to think creatively, to think imaginatively, You want to emphasize strategy and strategic problem solving and put the student at the center. You want them to develop that sense of agency and that they are able to advocate for themselves. Just as a reminder, every student is different, so we are always happy to make a custom recommendation for your student, whether it's for academic tutoring, test prep, or executive function coaching. If you are interested in executive function coaching, you can call us or schedule a 15-minute time to talk via Calendly. We offer a mind print assessment to help you uncover your growth areas and strengths, get a custom coach match, and get your custom coaching plan. And lastly, we now have a writing workshop. So if you are a rising middle schooler or in middle school or high school, you can work with a hand-selected tutor for a one-on-one experience with a 5-part curriculum, your pace, your schedule to improve your writing. So we've got a couple minutes left. I would love to answer any questions that you might have. Let's see. Brianna asked, is it good to journal your feelings if that helps you? Oh, yes. I strongly recommend journaling. I journal every single evening. It is a habit that's taken me a while to develop because it's really easy to say, oh, I'm tired, I'm not going to write something down tonight. But I always feel better if I do. Personally, I really like, there's these like line a day journals that you can look at, where basically they give you like just the smallest little thing. So you don't feel like, oh, I have to write a novel every single day. And what I really love is I'll just get ready for bed. I put my phone on the opposite side of the room so I can't look at it. And then I just write a couple lines about what happened that day. Maybe this is going to be more of an emotional journal about this is how I'm feeling, or this thing happened to me. But I find that emptying my brain that way makes it so much easier to go to sleep. And like I said before, especially if you have ADHD, it can be really difficult to go to sleep at night. And so doing that kind of brain dump sort of helps your brain go, okay, I don't have to think about that anymore because I've put it down in a safe place. And so that can actually be a really great way of getting all those feelings, emotions, energy out as sort of a pre-sleep ritual. So strong recommend for a journal. Katrina says, can you tell us more about the dot calendar? Katrina, I'm gonna hope and assume that you're talking about my beautiful bullet journal because it indeed does have dots in it. I love it because the idea is basically that you are using a blank journal that you can, oh yes, wonderful. Yay, I'm glad I got it. What I love about bullet journals is that they are blank. So the idea is that they do not come with any kind of like structure built in. So basically you get to create what is going to be very helpful for you. If it is helpful for you to like do, you know, a month at a glance across 2 pages and you want it to look like a chart or something, so that you can look at like, okay, so this is visually the projects at the end of the month. You can create that kind of spread in your book. If you're artistic and you want to make it beautiful so that you always are really excited about looking at your bullet journal, you can. I would recommend checking out Pinterest. Honestly, if you put in bullet journal for beginners on Pinterest, you are going to get so much information. I could go on about my beautiful spreads so often. I love tracking how many books I read because it's really fun to like bubble them in and it motivates me. So that can be a really helpful thing as well. So I find the bullet journal really helpful because I can make it whatever I want. But it's also about realizing what's realistic for you. I had a student I was working with who said, you know, I like the idea, but I don't like that it has a cover. Because if my to-do list is covered up, I'm not going to look at it. So we ended up just using a pad of paper so that he could just rip off the top page and his to-do list was always on the front. Would you recommend I carry a journal to school with me just in case something happens and I need to journal it? I think that as long as you're not writing anything down that you would be concerned for like privacy's sake, just because, you know, I think everyone can agree that a journal is sacred, but sometimes some people don't get it. So I'd say If you want to bring your journal with you to school and you want to journal about it at school, that's totally fine. If you're a little concerned, like what if somebody looks at it that I don't want to look at it, or what if I leave it at school and then I can't find it again? I would say, depending on how responsible you are with your personal belongings, I know that I leave things all over the place. So I probably wouldn't, just because I'd be so upset if I lost it. Lisa's asking, how do you determine which type of testing is most appropriate to diagnose ADD, and what suggestions do you have for identifying a provider? So I would strongly recommend a neuropsychological evaluation if that's within your budget. It's pretty much the gold standard. It is the most in-depth information. It is going to be accepted by most school systems, by the ACT and the SAT, in terms of accommodations. It's really going to get you everything that you need. If you're not looking for accommodations, then maybe psychoeducational testing might be most helpful. And if you want, honestly, if you want to just email info@appleruth.com, I would be happy to either refer you to someone in my geographic area. I'm located in the DC area, or I can also put out a call to my network and get some referrals for you in your area. In general, I'd also recommend, if cost is a factor, checking in with local universities that have graduate departments in like neuropsychological evaluation, because they may be able to get you a deal if you're working with somebody who's in a graduate program. So that's another venue to look at. Last question before we go: are there any apps that focus on working memory skills that a teen boy would enjoy? Man, oh man, that is a great question. I would say anything that doesn't have to do with the phone. There's so, like, phones really do not force us to remember anything, unfortunately. So I would say, honestly, I think like a board game or a card game. So something that's still competitive, that still makes you have to focus on what you're looking at. Maybe like an old-fashioned game of memory. Chess. Yes, I love that, Katrina. Yes, absolutely. Chess is wonderful. My husband's a big chess fan. He would definitely co-sign on that, because then you have to track, like, okay, I'm planning on moving my knight here, but you just moved your king there. So how does that affect things? I think that could be a really great thing. So I like games because they give you that competitive drive to do well, and it can be fun. I would stay away from any apps that claim to improve your memory. There's usually not a lot of science there. And then lastly, Brianna loves to doodle, and some of her teachers don't like it when she doodles in the notes. So true. So what I would do is, if you've got a good relationship with them, Brianna, I would say talk to your teachers. Say, this doodling helps me focus. I just want to let you know that, I'm paying attention. This actually helps me pay attention. I wanted to let you know that. Some teachers are going to understand that. Some teachers maybe are going to be like, well, I don't want you doing it on the notes that you turn in which case maybe you can make a deal with them where you've got your pad of paper next to the notes that you're going to turn in for class. So the ones that you turn in look really nice for your teacher, and then you've got a little doodle pad on the side. So, communication, talking and explaining and letting teachers know, like, this is what's going on with me and I want to take care of it, can always be a really helpful strategy. Thank you all so much. You had fantastic questions. It was so wonderful getting to talk with all of you this evening. If you have any questions or want any follow-up, please don't hesitate to reach out to info@appleruth.com, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.